Hey everyone, Emmanuel here. Okay, so let's continue on this topic of stretching and specifically kind of Systema's approach to stretching. And there's lots of ways of stretching. First video I kind of showed more of a ballistic, like a swinging type stretching. And then today I'd like to cover dynamic stretching. Now, dynamic stretching is really, I find it a great way to integrate body movement, breath work, as well as stretching. So while it is focused, kind of like maybe our focus is stretching, understand that if you can integrate your breathing and relaxation, you get much more than just stretching. So I like the dynamic stretching because it allows me to work on lots of things. Now, again, so you have the dynamic stretching is where you're not holding it. So static stretching is like a held position, right? And within static, there's two ways: forced and passive. The dynamic stretching also does have a forced and passive versions, especially if you involve a partner. But on your own, I think you're left with just the passive version of stretching. Okay, dynamic stretching. Now, let's begin with this, and I'll show you how I would start it. So again, dynamic movement has to deal with stretching and moving at the same time. But if I'm stretching with my arm, it obviously, there's a limit how much it can stretch. Like I'm reaching the end here, right? So what I like to do when I'm moving, let's say my arm, is as it gets to the end of reaching up, I rotate either my shoulder, my elbow, or my wrist, and you realize that it starts to change the angle. And so before I get to the end back here, it's like I change it. So it's like I'm reaching for the end, but just before the end. So if I can give you an analogy of driving. So it's like if you've ever been in traffic, rather than stop, start, which is agitating, if you leave some room with the car in front of you, and what you do is you spend time coasting, so you don't come to a complete stop. And then usually the traffic stops and starts again. And so the main goal is not to let the car stop, but to keep it kind of moving very slowly. So just before you get to the end, you restart it. So I know this is a hard end and a stop. So moments before I get there, I'm going to rotate either my shoulder, my elbow, or my wrist, and I change the angle. So just before it gets to the end here, I start to rotate and I change it. So I find where the end is and where I'm stopping. And just before that point, I change it. So it's like I'm stretching to almost the end, and then I'm rotating out of it. I don't want it to stop. So in this case, we'll do it with our arms, right? So they're moving, they're reaching, so they're at the outer edges, the outer edges of our reach, so it becomes a stretch, and then there's a rotation. And the rotation allows you to kind of see a different angle or a different move. So I'm rotating my hands, rotating my elbows, rotating, and you start to see that you start to kind of stretch your arms, your shoulder, and of course I'm getting into the body too, but I'm focusing more on my arms. So reaching up and just before the end, rotating out of it. I'm reaching all around, okay? And of course, as I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. And what you usually find with stretching is right at the end of the stretch, you find there's a little bit of a breath hold. It's not, I tell you that those little micro breath holds, they build up over the day. Maybe now it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's like the little stresses, like the drop of water, right? That example of just a drop of water, how that becomes a lot after an hour or 2 hours, right? So I really pay attention to, as I'm stretching, as I'm breathing in, I breathe out as I change direction. So I breathe in, it goes to one, and then I breathe out, it goes to the other. And I'm trying my hardest not to make that little last breath like tense. I'm trying to like, So it's like I'm using my breath to not tense up at the very end of the stretch, which is very common where we hold our breath just to get a little extra. Problem is that tension in the breath starts to communicate with your body. So I pay real close attention to the very end that my breath can exchange from in and out smoothly. Awesome. So again, there's really, I think of as many angles as there are, as many like front, back, left, right, up, down. I mean, there's just countless angles for this. So this is just, we're just out in an open space now. So we're just working open space. I'll show you how to do this on a wall. I'll also show you how to do it on the floor. The floor is the easiest, but I'm going to start with that at the end. Okay, we'll go the other way. Now, dynamic stretching or mobility or flexibility work for the body now. Okay, now for me, it helps if you look at an anatomy chart and see all the ribs and the musculature as well as the bone structure in the core body. And you realize there's lots of little muscles in between the ribs. There's lots of little muscles that connect onto the spine in the back. So what we're looking for is to kind of stretch those. So let's start with the sternum, quite easy. So I'm going to pull in my chest just like an inch in, and then I'm going to stick it out. So like an inch out, right? And then I'm going to move it down a little bit, and move it up a little bit. Out, in, down, up. Now, it's hard to see because it's really quite a small movement, right? But of course, the sternum is connected to everything is kind of connected, but the focal point is here, right? It could also be my ribs as well. So it's like I pull in my ribs this way, and then I also stick them out that way. I pull them back, I push them forward. So just this side of my ribs, right? So I can do the same with this side. I pull it in, push it out, pull it back, in, out, right? And what I'll find is as I stick my ribs out, I can actually feel some adjustments happening in my back. So they're all connected, right? But I'm kind of isolating the sides now, right? So what we're doing is we're getting some flexibility work for the real small muscles between our ribs that kind of connect between the cartilage as well as our sternum, our chest area. This part, I mean, it's also flexibility too. It's also, we want to stretch out those muscles, right? Of course, you could do it with a hand as well as this, no doubt, but not necessary in this case, right? We're dealing with small movements. And I'm going to think about my spine, right? And I'm going to start to kind of, and again, I'm trying to pay attention to not just wiggle my shoulders, but kind of try to feel my spine. So I bend the spine forward and then backwards. I try to open up like that. My spine, I can open it up, push it up, pull it down, bend it one way. So I'm trying to really focus on my spine, right? And trying to see how I can move, does my spine move freely? Okay? You could start with the neck, of course you'll start to feel that, right? But it's not just up, down, and in circles, but actually feeling the vertebrae in my neck, and then later a little bit more difficult in the back. But bring the focus there. So I'm trying to create some flexibility in the small muscles in my body, whether it's the chest area, whether it's the ribs, whether it's the spine. What you'll find is you'll also find that sometimes maybe you can move your chest quite good, but you can't really feel your back, or you can't feel, or you feel maybe immense tightness in the low back, like you can't feel those vertebrae. That's a little bit different, and I'll show you how to get into that, because the core body can be challenging. I think a lot of us understand dynamic stretching through the arms and legs, but maybe not through the body, where I'm constantly moving my body. All right, this part here. All right, so it's like I'm moving the ribs, I'm moving my spine in the back, right? I'm trying to kind of get some kind of motions that I can feel in my spine. So it's like I never let it. Just before it gets to the end here, I go back. Just as I get back, I go forward. And sometimes, if it helps you, it's like you're pushing your body. It's like I use my hands to give some direction to my body. You know, this kind of warm-up or this kind of stretching is really important for people that have maybe play contact sports, football, rugby, wrestling, martial arts, of course, boxing, where there's an impact onto the body, and the body needs to be able to be supple, be able to absorb that impact, as well as have enough flexibility in the muscles here that they can weather that. And one time I broke my ribs, which is interesting, was not from a punch or a kick or anything. I was wrestling in high school, and I grabbed the person and squeezed them quite hard. And as I went to move, the ribs weren't flexible enough. They're used to being strong. I could do lots of abs and you know, bench press and be physical. But when I tried to rotate and my muscles needed to be mobile and flexible, you heard, you know, I heard them kind of popping or whatever you want to call it. And you saw that I didn't have the flexibility in my ribs to do those movements. And so I really started working with developing more flexibility in the core body, right? It's not just mobility. I really want to be able to push into the muscles, and they're able to stretch as well as support the skeletal system, right? So that's takes a different approach. Now, I should maybe explain for those that maybe can't feel it as much, some different things they can do. Just give me a quick second and I'll show you some stuff. Now, I love using these things on the body because it provides pressure. So a good way of, if you can't feel or you don't have the mobility yet in your body, sometimes when you lie on this, the ball is now pushing my back open. And when I go to the side, right, now, or the back, now it's the ball is pushing my chest forward. So I use the ball to kind of facilitate some like a movement. So now it's like it's pushing these ribs out, it's pushing my chest forward, it's pushing this rib out, it's pushing my back out, right? So, and what you do is you slowly move on the ball, and its shape is kind of stretching out those muscles and moving the skeletal system in the core to where you need, right? And then what I do is I try to get off the ball and see if it helped my body. And in many cases, like, oh yeah, my body feels much more supple and the muscles feel more flexible, right? Again, little training aids that you can use for yourself. Now, there's more than just that. Like, this is a big ball. I could go with a very small one, the same effect, but like maybe a hard one, like a what's it called, medicine ball, right? So a medicine ball, quite hard, right? So it kind of gives me like a little massage, plus push into my body, plus force my core to start moving a little bit more. Okay. So again, dynamic flexibility in the body, right? So we don't want a static one. We want a mobile one, right? We want to be able for the body to be able to move freely, okay? And have flexibility, dynamic flexibility of movement, right? To be able to take on shapes with an impact, or how we fall, right, or something. We never fall statically. I guess we fall quite dynamic. Okay, so and then the last one with the legs. Okay, so dynamic flexibility with the legs. So let me just change this down a little bit more. So very similar to the arms, right? I lift my foot up really just a little bit, like an inch off the floor. And just before it reaches the end, I change it, right? So I've got my hip, I've got my knee. Now you'll be working on a little bit of balance as well, because you'll be up on the foot. So just before it reaches the end, I change it, right? And I'm basically skimming the ground with my foot. If I lose my balance, I just touch down just to get it, but come back up. And I'm really kind of stretching my legs, right? I'm stretching them. A little bit easier to do this on the ground, like kind of lying down, but you can definitely do it standing up too. So you're moving your leg in different ways and stretching at the outer edges of it. I'm trying to find like the outer edge, right? And of course the other leg will. So you don't let it reach an end. It's in motion, right? Now, what differs this from, let's say, a swing, right, which is the ballistic we did, this one is very controlled. The dynamic, I find, you're not kind of just going through a range and zoning out, but the dynamic, you have a lot of awareness to it. So there's a lot more control with the dynamic movements. I'm going slow enough, and I'm moving in a kind of very slow pace, and I'm trying to control those moves and find where I have flexibility and maybe where I don't have flexibility. Like maybe as I'm here, I'm okay, but then when I go back here, I'm not so flexible. Again, there is some balance component to it, of course. Now, if this becomes challenging, again, you could use the ball where you start to kind of move the ball on your foot and you're stretching, okay? So you're stretching, you're twisting, you're turning, right? And you're really pushing the leg towards the outer limits that you have, right? I like this because I can't put a lot of weight on the ball. I just put a little bit of weight, and then at the very end, like let's say this, I turn my ankle or I turn my hip, and I change the angle so it doesn't stop ever, okay? But really good way of kind of building dynamic flexibility into your legs, and also giving it some creativity. I mean, this is really creative work, right? So I'll use like this with my legs, right, a little bit as I'm training on my own. Then I'll pick the ball up and maybe put it on the wall and do the same thing with my arms. So I'm stretching, and then I can pass it from one hand to the other hand, to the other hand, to the other hand. Right. And then later, come on the ball with my body, right? So now I'm getting into some flexibility work for my core. So then a dynamic weight, right? So you can bounce between your body, your arms, your legs. So let me just move this down a little bit. There we go. Sorry, lost you guys for it. So standing up is not harder, but because you're on your feet. When you're on the ground, I find dynamic stretching much easier to do, right? And I wanted to end with that as compared to start with it this time. There's lots of interesting psychosomatic reasons for being on the ground as we get older, okay? It's kind of like we were kids, you know, playing on the ground like we were kids. Most adults don't do that. So when they get down on the ground and just start moving in a dynamic way, so there's no, there's no set pattern. It's anything is fine that you feel comfortable. At the beginning, people don't know, they're kind of confused or maybe feel they look a little silly. But then later, it actually feels quite good. Your mind is trying to understand what you're doing, so that opens it a little bit more than it just a familiar pattern. So it can build a lot of new circuitry in your brain for how you see things. Moving on the ground softens your body. In other words, it kind of makes it more supple because the floor is hard and you're moving on it. So any edges or any hard part, it's almost like they're ironed out. And as we get older, we're too serious. As we move, it makes us more playful, a little bit more youthful. And it also prepares us for one of the more dangerous things as we get older is falling, right? You're teaching your body how to be more supple so that if you do fall, it's a bruise or a sprain, not a break or a hemorrhage of some sort, right? So again, I would start on the ground, moving my arms in the air in a really dynamic way, out, just maybe like inches off the ground, right? And then later I would actually place them on the ground and start to kind of stretch, like I'm reaching for something, and then at the end rotate, and now I'm getting into my body. And then I would stretch with my leg one way and then stretch with my arm another way, and then reach with my leg again, stretching out, that in a dynamic way. And then just before the end, rotating, right? So it almost feels like I'm swimming. So I've got like my legs moving, I've got my arms moving, I got my body, I got my core body, and everything that touches the ground gives me a reference point. So I can reach and I can maybe pick a spot on the mat to reach for, and then reach over here and then reach towards the ball, then reach back towards, and I'm just moving on the ground like this. And I'm constantly breathing, of course, right? I'm checking my breath. And at the very end of the stretch, I'm trying to relax. I'm not trying to hold any tension. I'm trying to find the edges of my flexibility, but not the beginning of my tension. So I want to understand how I can reach without tensing myself. So you just keep doing that over and over and over in different ways. Now, again, if there's some marks on the floor, giving yourself something to reach for helps, because you'd be surprised when students of mine, when they think they've reached the end, if I come close and I put my foot maybe 6 inches from them, you'll see them try to reach for it, and they'll get there. So what you thought was your limit was 6 inches short. So that was, interesting to me to see, right? So it's nice if there's little marks on the floor you can kind of reach for. Sometimes I'll utilize the ball, so I'll reach towards the ball and then move it somewhere else. I'll reach towards that. Again, you can do dynamic with your arms, your body, as well as your legs. So the ground kind of incorporates all of them, which I like. And a big reason is there's no balance factor. There's no gravity, meaning as you stand up, there's no balance, and you can relax more. Okay, now I'll give it, because sometimes people just can't feel their bodies, right? They just don't have that. A good way to start this idea of feeling is by closing your eyes. Okay, so when I'm on the ground and I'm doing this exercise, this dynamic stretching, by closing your eyes, your ears open up because your eyes aren't there. So the next one is going to be ears, and you start to listen. And moving on the ground quietly is one of the most interesting things you can do. Okay, moving in general quietly is really interesting. If you've ever watched a good marathon runner, and their steps are so quiet. If you ever watched a good swimmer, they go through the water like a torpedo. It's like they're trying to disrupt the water as least as they can. They're trying to realize any disruption in the water causes resistance, which slows them down. So when your eyes are closed and you're on the ground and you start to move, So if I'm here and I've got my eyes closed and I start to kind of move and stretch and reach, right? It's like I'm listening for sound. I don't want to make a lot of sound. I just want to hear my breathing. What I really find, so you can try that as well, right? What I really find as well with this, because these are bigger, you try to, with lessons, I try to see them as like binoculars. So with a pair of binoculars, I can zoom in really tight on something far away, or I can zoom out and look at it from a distance and see big picture, right? Most people talk too much. They don't listen enough. There's no doubt that we're a very visual society. So it's great to close our eyes and just listen, right? So depending on students you're teaching or the things that you want to understand, sometimes when your eyes are closed, it's a different level of understanding comes to you. Go for a walk in the forest and look around and you see all the animals and everything, and then just find a nice spot and just close your eyes and just sit down and close your eyes. Or better yet, try to walk through the forest with your eyes closed, and you listen and all those things, and you realize this is how most animals in a forest go through the forest. Eyesight is not their number one defense mechanism. It's listening and smell, right? So sight is like the very last thing, because most predators or most animals, the forest is quite dense. You really can't see it. It's almost time you see it, it's almost too late. The danger. So we're a very visual society. So closing our eyes helps us, our other senses open up, and it also relaxes us because we take a lot of information in from our eyes. So something to think about when you're practicing dynamic stretching. Sometimes close your eyes if you can. If the space allows for it, it's really interesting. And again, you can just move. I know lots of people move, but the trick is that you always remember to stretch yourself. Okay. Now, the dynamic stretching for me as well, again, a big picture view is we study how to open ourselves. We study how to let energy go out. So as I'm stretching, see, it's going out. I'm not thinking about it coming in, but I'm reaching out and then I'm changing direction and I'm reaching out. So there's this constant outward focus of a reaching, of a stretching, of an effort that goes out. And that's really good, because tomorrow it's like when bad things come to you, or however they come, that you learn how to take them away from you, not bring them inside yourself, right? Because a lot of times, somebody says a bad word to you, and even though the person doesn't mean that much to you, it's some silly, maybe a guy driving, screw you or something, and then you take it inside. You realize a strong person, or a person that's got the stuff together, that kind of negative energy is shown the door out. It's not brought in. So you're teaching yourself also how to be like a Teflon, how things to slip off of you and go away, not come inside you. Okay. So dynamic stretching teaches the body from an energy level how to direct things out, not in. Okay, we can direct things in, but the things we want, not the things we don't want. So some bigger topics that are connected in Systema. Again, it's a martial art, but has lots of great attributes for health. And maybe like from military side, soldier has one type of stress, but I'll tell you, I think our societies these days have maybe not as sharp a stress, but nonetheless a lot of stresses, and no more than any soldier doesn't have to go through. So we really need to be able to channel negative energy and negative thoughts and negative actions away from us and not towards us. And dynamic stretching accomplishes a lot of that. Hope that helps, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't want to ramble too much. So we did ballistic last time. This time we did dynamic. Tomorrow, next week, I'll show you static stretching in its two versions, the the active and the passive versions. I'm sure a lot of you know that, but what I'm going to try integrate is the breathing. So we'll do like breathing with stretching, because as most of you know, or maybe don't know or heard it, but reminded, things are not stretches. A stretch becomes a stretch when you relax into it. Till then, it's a tense. So when I see somebody, pulling their legs, telling me they're stretching, I'm like, that's not stretching, that's tensing, because you're tensing. A stretch becomes a stretch when you relax into it, when you're actively relaxing the muscle so that you go into it more. That to me is stretching. Till then, it's a forced like effort. That's not stretching. Stretching is a relaxation towards and a lengthening of muscles, but a relaxation of that muscle towards that, not a force, okay, or a tense. Okay, very good, guys. I hope you enjoyed everything. I'll see you next Wednesday next week. Take care.